Richard Niles, composer, arranger, and guitarist. My record label, Niles Smiles Music, is releasing an amazing album that's very dear to my heart. Joe Venuti with Tony Romano at Gold Star Studios. Well, Niles smiles because Tony Romano was my dad. I grew up hearing these legends play in my living room, and today I'll share the story behind this mind-blowing record. But first, who was Joe Venuti, and why is he known as the godfather of jazz violin? Well, Joe Venuti revolutionized jazz violin in the 1920s with his childhood friend guitarist Eddie Lang. Their duets and Blue 4 and Blue 5 sessions set the standard for chamber jazz. Venuti played with everybody, including the Dorsey brothers and Jack Teagarden, and was in the Paul Whiteman Orchestra with Eddie Lang and their friend, Bing Crosby. After Eddie Lang's tragic death in 1933, Venuti's career declined for a time. Then in the 1940s, he worked on Crosby's radio show and played a lot, but it wasn't until he met my dad, Tony Romano, in 1937 that he revived the guitar-violin duet format. Venuti loved my dad so much that he and Eddie Lang's widow gave him Eddie Lang's Gibson L5, the first ever built to Lang's specifications. That very guitar is heard on this recording. Now, it must be admitted that Venuti was crazy as he was talented. He once called every bass player in the Union book to stand on a street corner for a fake gig, betting on how many could fit onto that corner. Then during the movie King of Jazz in 1930, he poured flour into a tuba, creating a white explosion on set. He once gave his one-armed friend, Wingy Manone, the birthday present of one single cufflink. You know, recording studios in the 1930s were just big rooms with windows. Seeing two pianos, Joe bet the other musicians what chord the piano would play if it was thrown out of a third-floor studio window. Well, it landed. Joe said G major. When the musicians disputed it, he said, "Well, the only way to settle this is to throw the second piano out the window." I'll let my dad tell you another even crazier story.
At the Roxy Theater in New York, we started to play this, and when we got into the rhythm part, the drummer came in, and Joe didn't like that. So he turned around to the drummer and he says, "Hey, don't play until I tell you, you know." So that happened about 2 or 3 times, and finally he said to me, "Hey kid, sing a song." And he says, "I got to go out and talk to the stage manager." So he went out and spoke to the stage manager, and when I took a breath for a change of key, I heard a pounding. And what happened? I turned around and it was Joe nailing the drummer's foot to the floor.
Yeah, that was Joe Venuti. But who was Tony Romano? Well, my dad was born in 1915, and his career spanned 60 years as a guitarist, singer, arranger, and songwriter. In the 1930s, he was a teen radio star with the Al Pierce radio show, working alongside comedians Maury Amsterdam and Mabel Todd. He became a first-call studio guitarist and vocal arranger at Warner Brothers. He's best known for his work during World War II, touring 6 million miles with Bob Hope's first USO show, performing for millions of GIs and several US presidents. Romano's songs were recorded by Johnny Mathis, Perry Como, Louis Prima, Anita O'Day. As a vocal arranger, he worked with legends like Cole Porter, George Gershwin, and Hoagy Carmichael. He played guitar for Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Judy Garland, and Tony Bennett. And he acted alongside Katharine Hepburn and his friends Jack Carson and Errol Flynn in many movies. As a singer, he recorded for Capitol and other labels, appearing in clubs all over the world. Often compared to Frank Sinatra, Frank once joked with him, "I'm getting sick and tired of people saying I sound like you." So the album is called Joe Venuti with Tony Romano at Gold Star Studios. How did it happen? Well, I'll let my dad tell you how these two crazy Italians met.
I met him when I didn't even know it was Joe Venuti. I was in New York in 1934. Anyway, I was carrying my Super 400. This man stopped me on the street in front of the Chesterfield Hotel in New York, and he says, "What do you got in there?" with this beautiful voice. And I said, "I've got a guitar." So he says, "A guitar? Who made it? Man Mountain Dean?" So I took it out of the case, and he grabbed it and he played a horrible C chord. And the guitar was looking at me like, "Help." So I grabbed the guitar back from his hands, put it back in the case, and went to do my show. About 4 years later, I'm at Warner Brothers doing a picture called Blues in the Night. The songwriter who wrote the score, Johnny Mercer. We had finished for that day, and I was going to go home, and Johnny Mercer says, "Tony, why don't you sit around and wait, because Joe Venuti is coming over. Do you know him?" And I said, "No, I don't. I only know him on record, and that he's a genius, and with Eddie Lang and everything." He walked in, and I looked at that face of his, and how could I forget it? It was the guy that stopped me on the street in New York. He says, "Hey, kid, you still have that big guitar?" I said, "Yeah, I've got the big guitar, and it's true, I got a hernia from carrying it." And he had his violin with him. So he took the violin out of the case and started tuning the violin, and I started playing chords to his tuning. We started playing, and Johnny Mercer and Ray Heindorf, they were going crazy what we were doing, just making it up and no rehearsal, no nothing. And so I said, "Well, hey, there's a restaurant over here called the Blue Evening." So we went to this Blue Evening, which was right across the street from Warner Brothers Studios. It was great, and Joe and I played and played and played and played. And he said, "The next wedding I get or a divorce," he says, "I'll call you and we'll play for him." And I said, "Okay, Joe."
So, by a happy accident fueled by Joe's favorite hot pepper sandwiches, his Stradivarius violin, and Romano's treasured Eddie Lang L5 guitar, one microphone, 2 bottles of wine, and about 40 of Joe's friends, they made a magical session of breathtaking swing and virtuosity. And by the way, no rehearsal. Joe said rehearsal was only for empty suits with 10 ears. My dad and Joe, well, they really had a very special relationship.
When you meet somebody who hears the same thing, then you become buddies like Joe Venuti and I were. He started tuning his violin, and I started playing harmony to it. And that led him into it. And that's how we made the album. To tell you the truth, Joe and I had a thing going that very few musicians do have in their life, that they can feel the other person and say, "Oh, he knows what I'm doing." And that's the way the album happened, too. 2 chairs, and that was it. From then on, whenever Joe and I saw each other, it was just a perfect marriage of music.
Venuti's stunning harmonized violin lines were achieved by pulling his bow hairs across all 4 strings at once. My dad's guitar playing has been called a masterclass in jazz accompaniment. Originally released as Never Before, Never Again in 1954 on Mercer's Jazzman Records, then it was released by Dobre Records on vinyl. Then the rights reverted to my dad in 1979, and I reissued it with Just a Memory Records. Now they've given me the rights, and I'm releasing a definitive edition. All Venuti Romano tracks, remastered, plus 2 rare orchestral pieces from Tempo Records. Dad chose to sing 2 of his favorite songs, written by his friend Willard Robeson, Pigeon-Toed Jode and I'm a Fool About My Mama, recorded in 1947. Joe, of course, plays beautiful solos, and the arrangements were by my dad with Frank Perkins, who later wrote Stars Fell on Alabama, a minor hit for my dad in 1956. The orchestra was billed as the Tempo Symphonette, which was basically the Hollywood studio players conducted by Joe Venuti. Jazz critic Leonard Feather wrote, "No musician now living is in a class with Venuti." Guitar Player magazine called my dad's playing a textbook for acoustic jazz guitar. For musicians who want to study Venuti's solos, Mel Bay published this book of transcriptions, which Pat Metheny said is important to all jazz musicians. Bob James said it should be studied for Joe's unrivaled contribution to jazz. Paul Anastasio, who studied with Venuti, called them spot-on, highly accurate transcriptions. The recording itself expresses the pure love of music, two masters with total empathy at the peak of their powers. Well, thanks for listening. I'm still Richard Niles, and look, I've been listening to this stuff since I was 3 years old. So it's deeply ingrained in my soul. In fact, to me, it's soul music. So if you want a recording of two masters of their instruments who loved each other as much as they loved music itself, and a recording that will instantly make you feel that love, get Joe Venuti with Tony Romano at Gold Star Studios. It's on all digital platforms, on YouTube, and soon to be in your heart. From Niles Smiles Music. Thanks.